Okay, so I want to
Domino's is not in here, is that correct?
say again.
You do give the $100.
Yeah,
This is not the right one?
it is.
Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you. Domino's. No, that'd be good though. Maybe we should just accept it. If it wasn't Domino's, maybe I might be inclined. Could you bring us a different kind? So here are a couple of things to bear in mind as you look into the future. I'm going to kind of recapitulate a bit of stuff and then we'll talk. So, in China and India, there are 90 million more X's than Y's. What are X and Y? There are 90 million more men than women. Just think of what that's going to mean. So the value of even very otherwise unattractive women is going to skyrocket, right? Families are going to have to pay dowries to the families that have daughters, right? All kinds of changes are going to occur. Of course, that's just looking at one side. The other is there's going to be a great deal of increase in unhappiness, violence, sexual frustration, and millions of other things.
Crime.
Right, and crime, yeah. So political instability, all kinds of other things. That's something to look forward to, isn't it? Here's another one which, from someone who ought to know, because Greece will suffer enormously from these changes. The former finance minister, Varoufakis of Greece, he's the one that European bankers didn't like because he told them the truth. So here's the little bit. It's a little picture of the future. As it turned out, the Communist Manifesto was right, albeit belatedly. It would take the collapse of the Soviet Union and the insertion of 2 billion Chinese and Indian workers into the capitalist labor market for its prediction to be vindicated. Indeed, for capital to globalize fully, the regimes that pledged allegiance to the manifesto had first to be torn asunder, the great communist powers. But they were the ones who signed on to the Communist Manifesto, but they were the ones who were torn apart, right? Yeah, Russia, China. Has history ever produced a more delicious irony? I think it's great. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other. As production is mechanized and the profit margin of the machine owners becomes our civilization's driving motive, society splits between non-working shareholders and non-owner wage workers. And as for the middle class, it's the dinosaur in the room, set for extinction. At the same time, the ultra-rich become guilt-ridden and stressed as they watch everyone else's lives sink into precariousness, the precariousness of insecure wage slavery. Marx and Engels foresaw that this supremely powerful minority would eventually prove, quote, unfit to rule over such polarized societies because they would not be in a position to guarantee the wage slaves a reliable existence. Barricaded in their gated communities, they find themselves consumed by anxiety and incapable of enjoying their riches. Some of them, those smart enough to realize their true long-term self-interest, recognize the welfare state as the best available insurance policy. But alas, explains the manifesto, as a social class, it will be in their nature to skimp on the insurance premiums, and they'll work tirelessly to avoid paying the requisite taxes. Do-gooders, establishment politicians, and recovering academic economists all respond to this predicament in the same way, issuing fiery condemnation of the symptoms, income inequality, while ignoring the causes, exploitation resulting from the unequal property rights over machines, land, resources. Is it any wonder we're at an impasse, wallowing in hopelessness, that only serves the populace seeking to court the worst instincts of the masses. What we don't need at this juncture are sermons on the injustice of it all, denunciations of rising inequality, or vigils for our vanishing democratic sovereignty. Nor should we stomach desperate acts of repressive escapism, the crier to return to some pre-modern, pre-technological state where we can cling to the bosom of nationalism. What the manifesto promotes in moments of doubt and submission is a clear-headed, objective assessment of capitalism and its ills, seen through the cold, hard light of rationality. That's a good thing. So it's a wonderful little thing. So part of what I want to say is, it's into that future, that complicated political future, that we have to project a future for our love lives, right? It isn't as if our love lives go on in independence from the social surroundings. Rather, the social surroundings shape even the kind of narratives that our love lives take on. So right, so here's a very simple picture. The blue-footed booby has a very simple narrative. It's pick a mate, give birth, finito la musica, right? That's it, right? We have a different, more complicated one, but it starts with the equivalent of the blue foot. It starts with simply getting hooked on someone for reasons that you don't fully understand. What happens next, right, is a complex mix of biology and sociology, social politics, sociopolitics, right? And it's a very complicated mix, very hard to pull out all the strands. But we can take a very obvious one. If we look back in history, we can see better what is very hard for us to see about ourselves. Because we look out on the world, right, we see things look the way they should look, right? They kind of, everything looks natural to us because we're part of it. But when we look at something that we're not part of, we can see structures that is very hard for us to see on our own. So an obvious one would be looking at, say, again, one of my favorite novelists, Anthony Trollope, is looking at 19th century England. You can see young aristocratic women thinking as follows, right? If I have money, I can fall in love with anyone, right? If I don't have money, I have to be careful where I fall in love. So you see them, when the blue foot, the attractive blue foot appears, they don't just do this, right? They don't just go for it. Some do, of course, and that leads to interesting novels. But some don't, right? They think, I'm going to censor that. I just won't see that person. I'm not going to let this develop. So the invitation is there, and the invitation is felt, but it's refused, because the dangers that lie down the road are too great. That shows that even the blue foot, right, is not immune to the social pressures that can lead you to deny it, to push it away, to harden your heart in the face of it, to refuse to go there. Different one is, now we're in a social organization of us now, of our emotional lives, and now we can read historians of private life, and there's a great Harvard history of private life. It's really worth taking a look at. History shows us a huge amount of how we got to be the way we are and how uninevitable it is. So this is Gerard Vincent writing about the 1970s. So it's with just yesterday, so to speak. And this is what he tells us. Sexual harmony became the structural principle of the couple. Duty, reciprocal devotion, children were no longer essential. Values had shifted towards greater emphasis on individual and or conjugal narcissism, precipitating or constituting the major event affecting private life in Western societies in recent decades. As a result, the couple allegedly became a three-way affair involving a man, a woman, and a third party, confessor, psychoanalyst, sexologist. Right? So once you move into the intimate disclosure, the need to have that capacity developed and wrinkles and obstacles in it smoothed out creates new profession, so to speak, or a new group of professionals, or semi-professionals, or self-declared professionals, who tell you how to do it, right? So that's a huge change. And with it goes hand in hand, and this is what's recognized by Anthony Giddens, is that goes hand in hand with a political change, right? Because what we have is a new kind of democratization of the couple. So intimate exchangers, right, consider it, go back to the end of the 19th century. It's who's got the money who, in a sense, controls the inner economy even of emotional life, right? The one who's sustaining the whole relationship takes on a special kind of power. It's typically a man. Not always, but typically. Right? As soon as that changes, so that the goal is not, right, you can't get close emotional exchange and that kind of intimacy just because you happen to have money. You can get loyalty, you can get a good wife to take care of your household, a good mother for your children. You can get a whole lot of things that marriages used to be about without that close emotional bonding at all. But if what you want is close emotional bonding, then a kind of democracy and equality exists already as part and parcel of the picture. So the Giddens style love story, and Giddens had a huge influence, Anthony Giddens, a political thinker, a huge influence on people like Bill Clinton. And so the third way, it's often called that, the attempt to chart a middle way between the right and the left, or the Republicans and the Democrats. That kind of picture was very much developed by Giddens as a theorist, and you heard the British prime ministers and American presidents talk about a kind of third way and try to move towards a new agreement. And Giddens wrote this very interesting little book on intimacy. And it calls Intimacy as Democracy. The outline, at least, its plot, you might have to take your nose out of. I'm really sorry, but you can't. Yeah, you might.
I can't.
Do you have are you taking some antihistamine or something?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's try to.
I have to eat shots here.
Yeah, that's awful. That's why I couldn't come on Wednesday. I'm sorry. I understand the suffering. In Intimacy as Democracy, this thought of Giddens is this, right? Intimate disclosure as part of the picture. And intimate disclosure requires firm personal boundaries. Soft ones lead to autonomy threatening codependency. It requires freedom from violence and coercion, as well as mutual respect. Without them, disclosure is bound to be inhibited or distorted. Openness is also essential, since an individual whose real intentions are hidden from a partner prevents her from autonomously determining the conditions of their association. And none of these prerequisites can exist, however, without a balance of power, the increasing autonomy of women, and a plastic sexuality no longer harnessed to the double standard. Well, you can see why, right? So think about it this way. This is now a relationship. When you think about what a close, loving relationship is, it now has the following demands put on it, right? Is that it should involve sexual harmony and satisfaction, intimate disclosure, but all of these, notice, raise a new set of pressures on the individuals who are entering into it. So the obvious one, right, for example, just like this, sexual pleasure for one requires A, sexual pleasure for the other requires B. If one can only do A and the other can only do B, somebody's not going to be satisfied. Sexual plasticity, within limits, nobody's expecting that these are, universal for everyone, but the point is that if sexual pleasure is the name of the game, then how you get it is going to be a central issue in the relationship. Whereas if it isn't, right, if that's not expected, and that's certainly true in 19th century marriages, right, nobody was expecting sexual satisfaction. Males got it outside of marriage, and women were expected not to want it or get it. I think not nice girls, right? So that's a huge change, right? And with it goes a whole set of changes in how we imagine ourselves and who the selves are that we bring to these relationships. So, we just go back to one where you were thinking that what I'm expected to be is a good housekeeper, a good mother to my children, a good support for my husband, a kind of support industry. He's supposed to be a good supplier of wealth. He's supposed to sustain the household. He's supposed to protect us from the vicissitudes of markets and so on. But you can easily imagine, somebody being very good at doing that and very bad in bed or very poor at emotional sharing or whatever beyond reason. And I think it's a great line of Martin Amis, which is a contemporary now lives in America, a contemporary English novelist. His novel Money is really worth reading. It's very funny, very clever. It says, almost the first question I ask about a character that I'm about to get going, a character I'm going to write about is, what is he like in the sack? Right, that's a kind of question if you think, what would they be like in the sack? Right, that can come to be, has come in this picture to be central in certain ways. Now, we're going looking back to the 70s, you can see either very close if you're me, or very far away if you're you. Right, if you're you might be thinking, but it's not like that anymore. Right, actually we've even moved beyond that picture. So now we might not think this, we might not think, oh, look, this kind of relationship that in the 70s was at the center of marriage, right? What marriage was about and relationship between people was about. That kind of relationship, that's not the way we think about it now. We think about it more in the way that I explored just briefly at the end of the book, which is that we think that what you want from one kind of relationship is not what you want from another kind, or another kind, or another kind. And we might think that there's no particular reason why we should be looking for all of them in the same person. That's a kind of picture of romance, but maybe it's a false picture. Maybe what has happened is we've sort of worked our way through one conception of marriage and mating into another, into another, into another, until we reach one that has the following features, right? You enter into it solely because of the blue foot, the attractor. You stay in it as long as the attractor is vivid. You have an out, this is what I was talking about with exit. The concept of love offers you an entree, you just fall into it, and an exit. I don't love you anymore. And that's the end of it. Notice, I don't have to show that you've been an adulterous partner. I don't have to show that you've been abusive. I don't have to show that you haven't taken care of the children. I don't have to show anything. All I have to do is say, my heart has changed. And that's the end of it. Because the entree, right, and the raison d'etre for the whole thing is that there be this close intimacy and sexual satisfaction. That I still feel that kind of limerence, or we still feel that kind of limerence for each other that we did at the beginning. And if we don't, there's a reason not to continue the relationship. That would be and hence the rise of divorce. Each one facilitated the other. And if you were in a country where there's no divorce, then the fact that your sexual life had come to an end with this person, you just didn't want it anymore, right? That didn't give you an exit from marriage, right? You could, of course, separate, live separately, move into separate bedrooms. You could do all kinds of things, but you couldn't actually start up another such relationship with another person, right? You would have to, you put your marital money had come apart from your emotional one, but you couldn't. So what we've done, I think, in the increase in divorce and the readiness with which we can get it, is in part a reflection of what we wanted marriages to be. Notice that the social change and the marital change go hand in hand. It's hard to say which one comes first. But even when we read the gospel now, it's really fascinating, I think, to see the way that we've changed thinking about our deep religious beliefs, right? So the Gospel of Matthew tells us that if a man divorces his wife on any grounds other than in chastity, right, that's the only reasonable ground. Pastors who are divorced themselves, and politicians who are divorced, maybe multiple times, right, will point to the gospel, but they no longer hear that, right? They hear other things, like not in that gospel, but in other parts of the Bible, they hear about something being wrong with homosexual relationships between men, and they still like that. But there are a whole set of other things which they sort of cherry pick on which ones they like the best. Okay, so that's what I wanted to get to, and I'm going to say that as we become astute students of ourselves, we become be reflective participants in these enterprises rather than simply going along with them, which is mostly what we do. But once we start reflecting on them, we can feel some of the possibility that Illouz writes about, when she says that, we seem to be offered either a kind of alienated distance, because we can no longer throw ourselves wholeheartedly into social practices we've become reflective about. And moreover, the other possibility is that we can have a kind of irony, right? We can kind of look at them with a cooler eye, an ironical eye, sort of thinking, oh, the others really are sucked into this. They really do believe it. They really do feel those greeting card sentiments that they send to each other. They really do believe this. But we can only do it with irony. And I think that there's some truth in that. That is, some truth is that reflection destroys value. And you can't anymore be innocent once you've become knowledgeable. Right? You can't anymore have that kind of innocent engagement with social practices. You have to something else. But there's a limit to irony. And that limit takes us back to the blue foot, in a way. It's that, right, just as, and this is the little example that I give. So a book is a mirror is one of my favorite quotes. Every teacher should like this one. A book is a mirror, Lichtenberg writes. If an ape looks into it, an apostle is hardly likely to look out. So when students say, I didn't like that book, I don't see why the Nicomachean Ethics is so great, the right thing to do is to quote Lichtenberg. It's a mirror, so you have to look. The one who looks into it has to be able to read it. It judges us, we don't judge it anymore. It's too good. A cultural scenario is similar, and a cultural scenario, as I'm thinking of, is something like modern marriage or whatever. A cultural scenario is similar. What we bring to it partly determines what we find in it. We didn't invent the forms of torture favored in our culture, for example, and our reaction to them is scarcely original. We scream, right? It hurt. Yet no amount of irony, no amount of cultural capital will alienate us from them. That is, you can't adopt an ironical approach that will save you from the pain of having your fingernails pulled out or whatever it is, or waterboarding, that form of non-torture hazing that we favor. Physical pain, as Oscar Wilde puts it, wears no mask, and so it's immune to being seen through. You can't see through pain. It prevents you from doing that. As a result, torture is a mirror that reveals the suffering animal and all who look into it. And our formulas of romance are certainly more susceptible to ironical unmasking, but since they have infantile roots, they tend to retain some of their power to pain or please, even in the face of it. So against them, too, irony's aggressive defenses are less than perfectly effective. Notice what that says, right? It's this. Even when you see through, you aren't therefore immunized against some of the power that the thing you've seen through has. It may still be the case that when you respond to the blue foot, you feel, I love you. And even though you know that's what everyone says, and everyone does this, you will still have, in the response, there'll still be something that you don't see through in it, right? That is something that resonates with you, something that goes deep. Why? Well, because you didn't form your attachment to things. You didn't form what matters to you, these deep attachments. You didn't form them with all the knowledge of cultural value in mind. You formed them out of your own, right, biological native responsivity to things. And those still resonate. What hurts you, what gives you pleasure, what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate, what's disgusting, what's not. These are very, very either unchangeable or very difficult to change. And that's because they're woven into the structure of our characters very early. And so they have the shape of a kind of fate to them, right? That is, you can feel like you were fated to fall for these blue feet. You were fated to do this. That this is fate, because it has that push to it that is very, very difficult to resist. Rather, it's got a kind of oomph that makes it very hard to pull back on. So enlightenment, right, what we're doing, becoming self-aware critics and thoughtful critics of our cultural scenarios, doesn't mean that those scenarios have nothing in them for us, right? They may have a lot. They may be the best that we can do, right, all we can do is kind of inhabit them to the best of our ability. Useful in this regard, but not guaranteed to work, is humor. Humor helps us to, right, in the way that we can't help but laugh at certain kinds of things, even things that are in some sense beneath us to laugh at. Right, even though we can't help it, our capacity to laugh and not to be, so to speak, ashamed of laughing, but to own it, so to speak, right, to take it in as something important. It's like our sexual responsivity. One reaction we can have to it is to push it away, right, as something threatening or unseemly or something culture says no to. But another one is to treat it as the way we treat what we laugh at, right? We think, yes, but it is a part of me. And what I have to do is find a way to have it be a non-alienated part that gets recognition. And I think a big part of sexual liberation has been that kind of strategy, is to think, but so it is me. That's just me as much as these other things. It's not something that I always have to be saying no to. Maybe I have to find scenarios or places within which I can comfortably say yes to. Okay, that's all I wanted to say by way of putting things together. I think part of what we're witnessing, and we'll see more of it, as the factors that I looked at, changes in the economy, changes in the population, that there are going to be so many more women. There are already so many more women than men, especially in China and India. These are going to put pressures on the emotional lives of all of us. I mean, just think of the following. I mean, it used to be that pioneers sent back to the old country for a bride because there were no women out west yet. And so that's a common American plot. It was the lonely guys out in California on the wagon train sent back to Asia or Poland or Ireland or wherever, or Italy, find me a bride. The bride would come out on a ship, take a chance. You'd never met this person. But the economic opportunities or the marriage opportunities for in the home country were so limited that this was a good option. So she got on a four-masted schooner and headed off into the unknown, and then she took a wagon for months and ended up in Oregon or California or whatever, and met a guy, right, and married and had children and so on. Now imagine it going the other way. Imagine the Indians, and wealthy, especially Indians and Chinese, will be sending to America and Europe for brides because there are no women available to them in India and China. What that does to our sense of who we are and what we are, and what it does to populations as they intermarry, so there's huge repercussions. And so that's one, and then just to finish on just one other, which is that our own emotional needs may be unsatisfiable within the structures that so far have been produced for them. So companionate marriage, the one that we've been talking about, where there's emotional exchange, that may sound like a really good thing, but if we look at the rates of breakup of such marriages, the thought might be, these are actually not very good ways to parcel up our emotional lives. Maybe we need other ones. ones that are more like this, right? So the Victorians had ways of doing it, right? There were people to do the housework, right? There were people to take care of the maintenance of, run the estate. There were people to cook and clean and do all those things. There were nannies to take care of the children. The wife was expected to play one sort of role, but she wasn't expected to do any of that. The man was expected to do another thing. So they kind of divided up their life. And what he did with his sexual life was he created, collectively they created, an economy in women who were available for purchase. They created prostitution that's been there as long as there's been a world. Right? So the thought was, I don't have to worry that my sexual needs are going to be satisfied in this close emotional relationship. I don't expect that. That's not the kind of sex I want even. I want a kind of sex with somebody that I don't feel I'm degrading. There's a great film, there's just a moment, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's one of those films where the mob boss finally has to see the psychiatrist. It's not The Sopranos, but the mob boss finally has to see the psychiatrist, and he's explaining that, yeah, he's got a wife and kids, and he loves them, and he's going to keep them, but he also has a mistress. And the psychiatrist says, tell me, why do you think you need a mistress? And he describes some sex acts he likes to do. And one of them is he likes to get blowjobs, right? And so the psychiatrist says, well, won't your wife do that? He says, the lips that kiss my children? It's very revelatory, right? I mean, I think the point is, I can do those things, but I instantly think the woman I do them with is degraded. And therefore, I couldn't do them with somebody I would get married to. So I need there to be fallen or degraded women because my sexual desires are such that they're not satisfiable, co-satisfiable with my other desires, right? So what we were thinking about there is that the economy of a relationship can outsource a whole lot of things that it can't accommodate. One thought we have is that if it can't accommodate all of them, it breaks. Another one is it outsources them. It says, yeah, we all want certain kinds of things. So there's, for instance, recently there's been a kind of rise in sort of middle-aged, not young middle-aged women, 30s and 40s, married with children, having affairs. And what they say about it is that they don't want it to break up their marriage. They're not having these affairs because they want an alternative to marriage. They want the romance, the excitement, the so on of courtship. They want that sometimes, but they don't expect their husband to provide it all. He couldn't, right? He provided that once, but they want the newness, right? The kind of sort of seduction, the being special, the being focused on. And men, of course, have similar interests. If we don't think that those are violations of the compact, right? They don't break the agreement we have. We don't feel like there are deep betrayals. Our emotions can change to accommodate them, right? Our emotions are not so fixed. Not everyone's, but on the whole, our emotions can change, so we can accommodate those kinds of things. So it might be that what we want to do is think not keep companional marriage, but actually think of this kind of relationship as only one of a panoply of relations that each individual needs to satisfy and be happy with. So that's a different model. Okay, now that ends my story.
But I think also, I think we're more compelled to do these outsourcing things because of technology now, right?
Yeah.
I remember, a couple years ago, there was this site that married people would go on to find and they got leaked and there was a whole mess.
Yeah.
But and stuff like that.
It still exists though. I mean,
right.
Too,
yeah, and then even with the case of Indians or Chinese, rich Indian and Chinese people, before, if you're a pioneer in California,
you don't now you can know a lot.
Yeah, exactly. You have no idea. Now you can know, have pictures and know who this person is, and you can video chat with them if you wanted to, and stuff like that. So I think we're more compelled to kind of approach that?
Yeah, so and you're right on the sense though. You no longer even have to meet the person to date, right? You can kind of have online dating and do a lot of exploration before you take them. There's a great New Yorker cartoon, so two dogs are typing on one of these sites. There's a two, and one is saying the other, no one's a dog on the internet. And I think that you kind of see the issues that there might arise. But yeah, but exactly, yeah, that's another thing that has changed our lives. We can do lots of things privately. So think about, for example, what you would have to do at one point in your life. You wanted to see forbidden or prohibited pictures or literature, right? You'd have to go to a seedy part of town. You'd have to watch out that none of the neighbors saw you, right? You'd have to go furtively and put things in a little brown bag. And now you can just, with a few clicks, right, you can access a whole lot of things. That's changed our emotional lives hugely because, right, we no longer have to take certain kinds of risks to do things. So on that site for let's call them cheating, as they often are, right, married couples cheating, on websites of this sort, you can find another person who's just like you, wants just what you want, right, isn't planning to break up your marriage, doesn't want any entanglements or ties, and that's all kind of up front. What we can't do, of course, is ensure that our knowledge of ourselves is so thorough that what we think to be risk-free won't have been risks then. So I mean, think of the obvious sort of one, where you find that this other person that you've met, but isn't somebody that you were thinking of breaking up your marriage for, but they turn out to be so engaging, interesting in all kinds of other ways that they make your partner look less attractive. Those are vicissitudes, but that's of course part of life anyway, right? We're never immune to bluer feet, right? And we don't know what effect they will have on us. We can't be confident. You can think, oh, I won't fall in love again, but until the moment at which it happens.
About the blue food and all of that, so we're putting a lot of emphasis on it. But when you look at the marriage and divorce rate, isn't there evidence to support that those match marriages have the same rate of divorce as the
But I don't think the
arranged marriages?
Yeah, so I think the normal way is, first of all, in our culture, we don't have arranged marriages.
I understand.
And arranged marriages are mostly part of now very traditional cultures.
Yeah.
What's true is there's a divorce rate on arranged marriages too. It's not that different, but part of that is simply that whether or not you, having been introduced to you're going to mate with this booby regardless. Do you find the blue feet attractive? Yeah, so I mean, the normal one is that the attractor precipitates you in, but if something else does, the attractor can precipitate you out if it's not there. So when you see the blue foot and it's not blue enough, that can be enough to chill your emotional engagement with this party that you. The other thing is that arranged marriages, until relatively recently, weren't expected to provide the emotional satisfaction for either party that we're talking about. They were part of the traditional male-female world. When women are emancipated and have money of their own, their demands become just as imperious as male demands are. And that changes a lot.
Well, there's a study, I think they did it in Britain, where they looked at traditional marriages in terms of they just met and they liked each other, and arranged marriages from immigrants and Indian stuff. And they said apparently the arranged marriages, the women are happier.
Yeah.
And a lot of people argue for arranged marriages. The argument would be you kind of learn to love the person.
Yeah.
So if you see the blue-footed booby, right, and you don't like it, but you're kind of you're forced kind of to get with that booby, you start seeing things in the blue that you start to like, you know what I mean? So that's the argument.
That's a possibility. I think one of the things that we need to write into a scenario is that along with the arranged marriages go family structures and social structures that make not finding that marriage acceptable a very high cost to the woman. So these are not cultures in which women have the same kinds of rights and opportunities as we do. And moreover, they're not ones in which the marriage is policed as rigidly by family members. So, we don't have in these, honor killings we do in other societies. You know, so when you've got a rigid, you know, it used to be, right, if you got divorced, you ostracized, especially women. And that puts a huge pressure on you not to get divorced, because if you do, there's going to be a whole set of other costs that go along with it. As soon as those costs disappear, you're more at liberty. Another one is you've got money of your own. So you've got a job, you've got a career. You don't need this guy's money to live. If you do, that puts pressure on you not to bail, too. So arranged marriages have a bigger backstory than just the thought that, you know, they're just like ours, only they're arranged. They're not. Should I try another take? Okay, so let's take two poles, right? So one is, I'm going to call it this, just for handiness. So let's call it the sort of psychobiological role. That is, roughly speaking, our native endowments. So what we get as a result of the natural law of genes, etc. Let's take that, right, as one pole. And then the wholly socialized being as the other pole. So we've got biology on the one hand and sociology or political reality on the other. And in the 20th century, there was a huge change in how we saw those two poles. It went one way and then it flipped over the other way. So the beginning, this is called the standard social science model. The standard social science model is essentially this: nature does nothing, it's all culture. Relatively speaking, nature is unimportant in looking at beings like us. We should only be looking at social structures, society, education, socialization, whatever. This is what you find in anthropology with Claude Lévi-Strauss in France, structuralism, ending up with people like Jacques Derrida and so on, who see that it's as if the code, right, does all the work. So you're almost a blank slate. And into the code you come, and the code writes all over you. And then you're the socialized subject. We're those things. Then, that held huge power. And of course it puts all the energy and emphasis on social structures and on politics and on changing society and changing education. Because what nature contributes is so small. Now when we look back at Aristotle, right, or Plato, we see there nature doing far more, right? Or nature is actually something that contributes a huge amount, and culturation can change a little bit, but not that much. And I think that in America and England, especially with the advent of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, both looking at the contribution that nature makes, and actually doing primate studies, for example, and seeing how much like us great apes are. Looking at things like, something I mentioned before, that women are far more likely to step out of, have adventitious sexual relations when they're ovulating. And this explains, so sociobiologists explain this in part by saying, well, look, women want one kind of mate for long-term care of children, but actually they don't want to reproduce with that kind of male, right? They want the so-called sneaky fucker. This is what sociobiologists call it. So the sneaky fucker is somebody who, right, the male, it's a male who takes every opportunity he can to sow his seed. Notice that if you're a Darwinian, you're thinking, that's good, right? Because every time you do that, you increase the chances of your genes getting into the next generation, which is what evolutionary biology is all about. So from a male point of view, lots and lots of partners is a really good evolutionary strategy. Genghis Khan, who's very successful at this, Genghis Khan's genes are in hundreds of thousands of people now because of the number of women he impregnated. That was part of his strategy, of course. But anyway, that's a fact. So that's the male one. So notice that from the female point of view, right, eggs are very expensive. You only have a finite number of them. The care of offspring is costly, and long terms, really, children remain in need of care until they're about 40 or so. Right, I mean, they need a lot of care, put it that way. What point the cutoff is complicated. But even if it's 7 or 8, 10, right, before they're fully able to take care of themselves to some extent, that's a long time. So from the female point of view, marrying a faithful partner is good from the child care point of view. But from the genetic success point of view, you'd be better off having children with sneaky fuckers. Why? Because they're likely to inherit this trait and then spread your genes more widely. Now, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sort of tied to that, it like adds another layer in our society. They've looked at women who are on the birth control pill, and they are attracted to a certain person, they have a relationship, they get married, they're about to have kids, the woman is off the pill. And it's very common that the female's no longer attracted to that same male. Because it is messing with your biology, and you're never ovulating, so you're in a state where you're not attracted
That's fascinating,
to that person.
Yeah. So there are a lot of studies that are of this sort, right, which suggest that our genes don't, it's not this, that they determine. They don't. But that they interact with social structures in all kinds of ways to produce outcomes. So, just take an obvious case, right? Each one of us has the capacity to learn a natural language, but which one we learn is not determined by our genes, right? And in the same way, that's true of how our genes get expressed. They require social expression. They're not just, they don't determine everything. In fact, it's not clear how much they do determine. So it's wrong to think about like a gay gene or whatever as simply forcing you into this. That doesn't. But okay, so what we have to think though is that what we bring to the cultural scenario is not itself mute, it's not erased by the cultural scenario. So cultural scenarios are always in a complicated dialectic with our biological inheritance, with our psychobiology, right? What we bring to them. And with our early infantile upbringing, we don't just come sort of psychologically naked to the social structures, and that means that the social structures are in part answerable to our pleasure repertoire, let's say. They don't themselves fully determine. So think about it this way. Think about not getting pleasure or getting pain or getting frustration as costs that a social system can impose on you. So imagine that you're gay and you would like to have homosexual sex, but your society forbids it. Then that's cutting you off from a certain kind of pleasure that you would like, or imposing frustration. Right? But we've got lots and lots of pleasures that are like that, right? And that tells us so that, right, a social system can be overly repressive, or it can make certain pleasures more important because it represses them. And that dialectic is never over. So, right, I think of our pleasures as exits, right? So when a social system gets too expensive, imposes too many costs on the people who go along with it, one of the things that produces the pressure to create a social exit, as gay liberation did and women's liberation did, is the fact that our pleasures are being unnecessarily and intolerably repressed. So pleasure is one cause of exit. And pain, of course, which is correlative, is another one. Right? Costs can be huge. So those 90 million guys who, let's imagine, are not going to find partners, right? That's a massive social cost imposed. That's a product of social programs, right? Of the one-child program, of the preference for males, a social construct, right? Wanting a son if you can only have one child as a social construct. Those social norms, right, are going to impose huge costs on these downstream people who will then want to change and rebel against social structures. The other is, right, it's going to change hugely the status and importance of women. So you have, on the one hand, countries where there's a dearth of women, and on the other hand, countries like ours where there are more women than men, but also where women have become increasingly interested in politics because they've been repressed. So they don't want men deciding things about like whether or not abortion should be legal or whether contraception should be legal. And they're sick of these old guys sitting around in positions of power telling them what they can do. So they thought, okay, now we're going to run for office. We're going to vote. We're going to take over. Well, that is to a certain extent going to happen. There's no question about it. More and more women will be in politics, and with it will be a whole set of new priorities. Men's priorities are of one sort, but women's are another. You can foresee that there'll be far more generous child welfare programs, right? Because women understand better than men do the costs of those. In fact, they bear the costs of them more than men do. So you can see in those shifting changes that will also affect how we see what it is for men and women to enter into loving relationships with one another. So, yeah.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem like a clean transition to me because, like, they're...
Clean transition?
Well, as in, like, I don't know, from this, point in political time to a point where there will be more women.
What's a clean transition?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, not resisted, men just fall down and say, absolutely. I agree.
There's
Yeah.
supposedly
Yeah.
like sweep of changes in I guess favor of, like women's rights and like the rights of their body and, that whole set of rights. But the thing is, it seems to me like there are like the trends of like traditionalism versus like progressivism exist within women as well. Because there are like women who are pro-life and like they will fight and women who are not.
Yeah.
So
I think that's going to happen too. I think it's really sort of like something like this. Look at the increasing number of women. Look at the ones who are in the next generation especially. Look at attitudes. So when we do, one of the biggest things is, if you look at age groups as opposed to other things, you can see that one set of attitudes is lodged entirely in the older 30s, and the other set of attitudes is hugely, a different one is hugely represented in the under 30s. So you can think, and that's one reason why certain traditionalists are very worried about what will happen as the next, so that's one. The other is there's a pressure to change the voting age from 18 to 16. It's a lot of, the thought is, look, this idea that you're not ready to participate till you're 18 is pretty preposterous, right? And I agree, I think it is. I don't see that many 16-year-olds are better able to vote and know more about what's going on than many 30-year-olds do. It's not, we ought to be thinking about knowledge bases, not so much about age groups. But anyway, that's a pressure, and many states are going to respond. Look at the push against the National Riflemen's Association coming from the kids who are getting shot in schools. These are produced in part by technology. Right? It's that these groups can organize. So I agree, you can't predict outcomes. What you can say is, right, provided no monumental catastrophes and disasters happen, there is very likely to be a pressure in this direction. Women are going to be more represented. Their issues are going to be more at the center of things than they already are. And now shift over to a case where it's the dearth of women. is going to increase the social value of women. Naturally, it's a scarcity issue. So as soon as something becomes scarce, it becomes valuable, especially if it's wanted. And sexual partners of women are wanted, big time. So those are going to create changes too, things we can't actually foresee very well.
I think what's interesting about the voting age
Yeah.
that you brought up is that, like, for example, like also to like run for office, you have to be 25 to run for Congress, or like 30 to run for Senate, like I think 40 to run for president. It'd be interesting to see if that also changes as well.
Yeah.
Like we hear like a 25-year-old running for president.
The first 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Like him. Yeah. Well, it's not, if we look back, I mean, it's true that it's very difficult not to look at the politics of any country with a jaundiced eye and wonder, right? You know, when Eisenhower starts to look really good to you, when you look at the succession of presidents post-Eisenhower, you can think, there must be something wrong. But anyway, yeah, who knows what the empowerment of children, which has already had a huge economic effect. So children are empowered in part because they're able to exert a kind of emotional pressure on their parents that, for example, I would have been completely unable to exert on mine. The idea that children's needs, wants, and so on are insistent and should be heard, so that they should be funded. That's part of a modern thing, and it's in part, I think, because parents feel guilty, more guilty about their children than they used to, right? So they cater to them. More guilty because the idea of what they should be providing them has ratcheted up hugely. Right? So a lot more anxiety about parents, maybe too, if both parents are working. The thought is, look, I'm denying them so much already, give them what they want. But whatever it is, children have economic pressure, and with economic pressure in a culture like ours, eventually comes political representation. It's inevitable that the two go together, right? I think. So what I've been trying to get across for the semester, get a lot, but here are a few things. And one is not to think in terms of polarities, but to think in terms of the two poles being tension points in a kind of a creative dialectic, right? So the thought is, don't think, go to one, go to the other. Think, what is this polarity doing for us that we want to keep it around, right? And what uses it to feel the pull of these two things? We don't want to settle because settlement is kind of boring and dreary. We want to keep alive, and life requires the pressures that give rise to new forms of it. So that's a very central one. The other is that as Plato realized already, our emotional lives are part of our political lives. The private-public distinction is just a polarity, a way of articulating something, but each permeates the other, right? You can't, on the one hand, you can't have women denied certain kinds of things to the point at which they become so angry that they become politically active, the vote being an obvious case. What happens then is political life changes. And in the same way, when politics pushes in one way and it imposes huge costs on an increasing number of people, there's a reactive formation that then changes political life. It doesn't always go that way. It could go the other way, where you just kill off all the people who are disenchanted. That's a favorite authoritarian one. They're rebelling, kill them. Then there won't be any rebels, if you kill them all. So repressive regimes can be sometimes very successful at quieting the voices of alienated citizens. But in democratic societies, the voice of the many tends to eventually have some kind of power and influence. That's one of the virtues of democracy. So we want to keep that alive in our thought too. The other is that all kinds of changes happen off screen. We're not even aware of them until they move onto the center of our lives. So it's true that the breakup of the old Soviet Union and the embracing by China of a kind of market economy, nobody really saw those things. Right? We claim that we caused the breakup of the Soviet Union, but no, it doesn't take much analysis to see that that's kind of right up there with we won the Second World War. It's rather that pressures that from inside and outside cost the Soviet Union its unity. Those same kinds of costs could cost us our unity too. And we're not, guaranteed to be above all that. It might well be that part of what's happening to us is that a kind of more liberal group is increasingly hated by and hating a more conservative group. So to speak, and it almost traces the Mason-Dixon line, not quite, but it almost does. You can kind of imagine a new secession, right, in which the northern states are one kind of country and the southern states are another kind of country, and the deep values that are, wanted on both sides just can't peacefully coexist. We can't actually find a way to be both liberal and Christianly conservative and so forth. We just haven't found a good way to do that. We've increasingly lost respect for each other and found the other to be intolerable rather than merely different. We're not doing very well on that front. Racial tensions, unresolved, just as bad as the shootings of African Americans and the incarceration of them. We don't know what the future holds in this regard. But so these two are part of our the world in which our erotic destinies have to be worked out. Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time, I think, at the beginning of the semester, but then sort of, I guess, throughout the whole thing, talking about this distinction between sort of like rational, like sort of chosen love, or like the agape that you would feel in the biblical sense or Christian sense or whatever, and then this sort of biological, like determined sense of love. And one of the things that I was wondering, I would love to hear you talk about is in sort of like this social picture where there's a lot of like misunderstanding and strife, like maybe this is just like a misguided question, but like which sort of force, this sort of like rational, like chosen type of love, or this like non-determined love, do you think has more, like, it's more fitted to?
I think that, as you might guess, part of my thought is you need both of these pictures. But let me connect some of what we've just been talking about back to your picture of the self. Right? So I left that out of my little, here are some things to. Another is that our pictures of love and our pictures of, so those in politics get wound up together. Yeah. But our picture of ourselves and our picture of love are codependent too. So think of, for example, the self that's suited to intimate disclosing relations, and the self that's suited to 19th century male head of household marriages. But those are different arrangements of our psychologies, right? Some things get heightened, pushed, strengthened, other things get backgrounded, pushed out, alienated. No, those are not part of me. These are me.